The sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet evening air in Columbus, New Mexico. And Adelaide Foster knew her life was about to change forever when she saw the fury in Marcus Delaney's eyes across the dim saloon. It was October 1885, and Adelaide had been working at the Silver Dollar Saloon for 3 months, serving drinks and dodging wandering hands while trying to save enough money to start over somewhere new. She had fled St. Louis with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of shame after her former employer's son had ruined her reputation with lies and cruel manipulation. The whispers had followed her like a plague, and she had learned quickly that a woman with a stained name had few options in this world. Marcus Delaney was a cattle buyer who frequented the saloon, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him like thunder before a storm. He had been drinking heavily that night, and when Adelaide had politely refused his advances for the 3rd time that week, something inside him snapped. The glass he hurled missed her head by inches, exploding against the wall behind the bar. The room fell silent except for the tinkling of falling shards. "You think you're too good for me," Marcus snarled, his words slurred but his intent crystal clear. A saloon girl putting on airs. Adelaide's throat tightened with fear. But before she could respond, a figure rose from a corner table with the kind of deliberate slowness that spoke of controlled danger. She had noticed him earlier in the evening, a cowboy who had been nursing a single whiskey while reading through what looked like ranch accounts. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. "The lady said no," the cowboy said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "I suggest you apologize and walk out of here peacefully." Marcus turned his bleary gaze toward the stranger and laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "This ain't your concern, cowboy. Mind your own business before you get hurt." "I'm making it my concern," the cowboy replied, moving with measured steps to position himself between Marcus and Adelaide. "Name's Sebastian Vance, and I don't tolerate men threatening women." The confrontation could have turned deadly. Adelaide could see the calculation in Marcus's eyes, the way his hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. But Sebastian Vance stood his ground with the kind of quiet confidence that came from a man who had faced down danger before and survived. Perhaps it was that unwavering certainty, or perhaps Marcus was drunk enough to realize he was outmatched. But after a long, tense moment, the cattle buyer spat on the floor and stormed out of the saloon. The room slowly came back to life with cautious conversation and the clink of glasses. Adelaide found herself trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the bar to keep herself steady. Sebastian turned to her with concern softening his angular features. "You all right, miss?" he asked gently. Adelaide nodded, not trusting her voice. She wanted to thank him properly, but the words seemed stuck somewhere between her heart and her throat. Instead, she managed a shaky smile and poured him a fresh whiskey with hands that only trembled slightly. "On the house," she said quietly. "Thank you for what you did." Sebastian accepted the glass but did not drink immediately. Instead, he studied her with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "A man who treats a woman like that deserves worse than words," he said. "Will you be safe when you leave here tonight?" The question surprised her with its genuine concern. Most men who frequented the saloon saw the women who worked there as objects, not people worthy of protection or care. "I'll be fine," she said, though she was not entirely certain that was true. Marcus Delaney struck her as the type to hold a grudge. "All the same, I'd feel better walking you home when your shift ends," Sebastian said. "If that's acceptable to you." Adelaide hesitated. She had learned the hard way that accepting help from men often came with expectations she was unwilling to meet. But something about Sebastian Vance felt different. There was a straightforwardness to him, an honesty that seemed rare in her experience. "My shift ends at midnight," she finally said. Sebastian nodded and returned to his corner table, where he resumed his paperwork as though nothing unusual had happened. Adelaide went back to serving drinks, but she found her gaze drifting toward him throughout the evening. He did not look at her with the hungry, possessive stares she had grown accustomed to from other patrons. Instead, he simply worked through his accounts, occasionally glancing up to ensure no one else was causing trouble. When midnight finally arrived and the saloon began to empty, Adelaide retrieved her shawl from the back room. Her employer, a gruff man named Henry Walsh, gave Sebastian a once-over and grunted approval. "See that she gets home safe, Vance," Henry said. "Adelaide's a good worker, and I don't want trouble following her." Sebastian tipped his hat in acknowledgement, and together they stepped out into the cool October night. The streets of Columbus were quiet at this hour, with only the distant sound of a piano from another saloon breaking the silence. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light across the dusty road. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes before Adelaide spoke. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "Stand up for me back there or walk me home, but I'm grateful you did. Where I come from, a man protects those who need protecting," Sebastian replied. "My mother raised me and my sisters on her own after my father died. I saw how hard it was for her, how some men thought a woman alone was fair game for disrespect. I swore I'd never be that kind of man." Adelaide felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. "That's a good way to be raised," she said. "Your mother sounds like a strong woman." "The strongest I've ever known," Sebastian agreed with obvious affection. "She passed 2 years ago, but I try to live in a way that would make her proud." They reached the boarding house where Adelaide rented a small room on the second floor. It was a modest building, well maintained by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who ran a respectable establishment. Adelaide paused at the bottom of the exterior stairs, turning to face Sebastian. "Thank you again," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "For everything tonight." Sebastian smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something genuinely handsome. "May I ask your name?" he said. "I realize we haven't been properly introduced." "Adelaide Foster," she replied. "Most people call me Addie." "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Foster," Sebastian said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that felt almost courtly. "I hope the rest of your night is peaceful." He turned to leave, but Adelaide found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Will you be back at the Silver Dollar?" Sebastian glanced back at her, and even in the moonlight she could see the warmth in his expression. "I come to town every couple of weeks to handle business for my ranch," he said. "The Vista Verde, about 15 miles north of here. I suspect I'll be back before the month is out." Adelaide nodded, telling herself the flutter in her stomach was simply relief at having made a potential friend in this lonely town. She watched him walk away until he disappeared around a corner, then climbed the stairs to her room with her thoughts in turmoil. That night, she lay awake for hours, replaying the evening's events. She had grown so accustomed to viewing all men with suspicion that Sebastian's kindness had caught her completely off guard. But she could not afford to let her guard down, not after everything that had happened in St. Louis. She had learned the hard way that men who seemed kind often wanted something in return, and she had nothing left to give. 2 weeks passed before Sebastian Vance returned to Columbus. Adelaide had thought about him more than she cared to admit during that time, wondering if he would actually come back, or if their encounter had been a singular moment of kindness that would never be repeated. She was wiping down tables late one afternoon when the saloon doors swung open and Sebastian walked in, looking travel-worn but pleased. His face lit up when he saw her, and he made his way directly to the bar. "Miss Foster," he greeted her warmly, "it's good to see you again." Adelaide felt her heart skip in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Mr. Vance," she replied, aiming for a professional tone even as a smile tugged at her lips. "Welcome back. The usual whiskey?" "Actually, I was hoping you might have a dinner break coming up," Sebastian said, his gray eyes intent on her face. "There's a decent restaurant across the street, and I'd be honored if you'd join me." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Adelaide's instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment that came from trusting men. But something in Sebastian's expression, open and hopeful without being demanding, made her pause. "I have 30 minutes starting at 6, she heard herself say. "But I should warn you, Mr. Vance, I'm not looking for complications in my life." "Call me Sebastian," he said gently. "And I'm not offering complications, just dinner and conversation with someone whose company I enjoyed." At 6 o'clock, Adelaide found herself seated across from Sebastian at Murphy's restaurant, a simple establishment that served hearty food to ranchers and townsfolk alike. The owner, an Irish immigrant named Connor Murphy, personally brought them plates of beef stew with fresh bread and butter. "So tell me about the Vista Verde," Adelaide said, partly because she was genuinely curious and partly to keep the conversation away from herself. "What's it like, running a ranch?" Sebastian's face animated as he talked about his land, the cattle he raised, and the small crew of men who helped him keep the operation running. He spoke of the challenges of drought and market prices, but also of the satisfaction that came from building something with his own hands. His passion was evident in every word, and Adelaide found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation. "It sounds like hard work," she said when he paused to eat. "But good work. The kind that means something." "It is," Sebastian agreed, "though I'll admit it can get lonely out there. Most of my hands are older men set in their ways, not much in the way of conversation beyond cattle and weather." "Is that why you come to town?" Adelaide asked. "For the company, partly," Sebastian admitted. "And to handle business I can't manage at the ranch, banking, supplies, correspondence. The usual necessities." He paused, then added with disarming honesty, "Though I'll confess, I've been looking forward to this trip more than usual because I hoped I'd see you again." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was not accustomed to such straightforward sincerity. The men she had known in St. Louis had been full of flowery words and empty promises. Sebastian's plain speaking was refreshing, but also frightening in its genuineness. "I don't know what you're hoping to find with me," she said quietly, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "I'm just a saloon girl trying to make enough money to start over somewhere else. I'm not anyone special." Sebastian leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "From what I've seen, Miss Foster, you're someone who works hard, treats people with respect, and carries herself with dignity despite circumstances that I imagine are often difficult. That seems pretty special to me." His words pierced through the armor she had built around her heart, and Adelaide felt the sharp sting of tears threatening. She blinked them back quickly, unwilling to cry in a public restaurant. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About my past or why I ended up here." "Then tell me," Sebastian said simply. "If you want to, I'm a good listener." Adelaide looked at him across the table, this man who had defended her without being asked, who spoke to her with respect and seemed genuinely interested in who she was as a person. Some deep instinct told her that Sebastian Vance was someone she could trust, but trust was a luxury she could not afford. "Not yet," she said finally. "Maybe not ever. My past is my own, and it's not something I share easily." Sebastian nodded without apparent disappointment. "That's fair," he said. "We all have things we'd rather keep private, but I hope you know that whatever your story is, it wouldn't change how I see you, which is as someone I'd very much like to know better." They finished their dinner talking of lighter things, and when Adelaide returned to the silver dollar, she felt something she had not experienced in a long time: hope. It was a dangerous feeling, one she tried to suppress, but it glowed warm in her chest nonetheless. Over the following months, Sebastian's visits to Columbus became more frequent. He always made a point of stopping by the saloon to see Adelaide, and they fell into a pattern of sharing dinner together when her schedule allowed. Slowly, carefully, Adelaide began to let her guard down. Sebastian proved himself to be exactly what he appeared: a good man with a kind heart and no hidden agenda. He told her about his childhood in Texas, how his family had moved to New Mexico territory when he was 16 to start fresh after a drought destroyed their farm. He spoke of his father's death from fever shortly after they arrived, and how he had worked alongside his mother to build the Vista Verde from nothing. He shared his dreams of expanding the ranch, maybe starting a horse breeding program in addition to the cattle. Adelaide, in turn, began to share small pieces of her own story. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress who had died when Adelaide was 17. She mentioned working as a clerk in a dry goods store, though she did not yet speak of what had driven her from that position or the city itself. It was a cold evening in late January of 1886 when Marcus Delaney returned to Columbus. Adelaide was walking back to her boarding house after her shift, wrapped in her heavy coat against the biting wind, when he stepped out of the shadows of an alley. She had grown complacent over the months, assuming he had forgotten about her or moved on. She realized her mistake too late. "Remember me," Marcus said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. His face was harder than she remembered, carved with bitterness and alcohol. "You cost me respect that night, having your cowboy friend threaten me. I don't forget things like that." Adelaide's heart hammered in her chest. The street was deserted at this late hour, and she knew screaming would likely bring no help. "I don't want any trouble, Mr. Delaney," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry if you felt disrespected. Please just let me pass." "Not until you apologize proper-like," Marcus said, moving closer. "Not until you show me the respect I deserve." Adelaide saw the intent in his eyes and felt fear turn to ice in her veins. She opened her mouth to scream anyway, but before any sound could emerge, a familiar voice cut through the night. "Step away from her, Delaney." Sebastian emerged from the darkness, and Adelaide had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. He must have been waiting to walk her home, something he had taken to doing whenever he was in town. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, and his expression was harder than she had ever seen it. Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You again," he spat. "Should have known you'd be lurking around like a dog after scraps." "Last chance," Sebastian said, his voice cold as the winter air. "Walk away now, or this ends badly for you." For a moment, Adelaide thought Marcus might actually draw his gun. But something in Sebastian's stance, the absolute readiness in his posture, must have communicated that this was not a fight he would win. Marcus cursed viciously but backed away, disappearing into the night with threats that echoed behind him. Sebastian immediately turned to Adelaide, his expression softening with concern. "Did he hurt you?" he asked urgently. Adelaide shook her head, though she was trembling from head to toe. "No, you arrived in time, but Sebastian, he's going to keep causing trouble. Men like him always do." "Then you can't stay here," Sebastian said firmly. "Come to the Vista Verde. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who has her own quarters in the main house. You could stay with her, Help her with the housework if you want to earn your keep, though you wouldn't have to. You'd be safe there, Adelaide. I give you my word." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Adelaide could not immediately process it. Leave Columbus. Go to Sebastian's ranch. It felt like too much, too fast, even though part of her desperately wanted to accept. "I can't," she said, even as her heart argued otherwise. "Sebastian, I can't just impose on you like that. And what would people think? What would your housekeeper think?" "Mrs. Chen would think I'm finally showing some sense," Sebastian said with a slight smile. "She's been telling me for months that I work too hard and need more pleasant company around. As for what other people think, I stopped caring about that a long time ago. All that matters is that you'd be safe." Adelaide looked up at him, this man who had become so important to her over the past months. She thought about Marcus Delaney's threats, about the constant vigilance required to work at the saloon, about the bone-deep weariness of living in fear. And she thought about the Vista Verde as Sebastian had described it, a place of wide skies and honest work. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "Really sure. Because if I accept, Sebastian, I need you to understand that I'm not what you think I am. I'm not the person you see." "Then tell me who you are," Sebastian said, taking her hand gently in his. "Whatever it is, Adelaide, I promise you it won't change anything." They were standing in the cold street, and Adelaide knew this was the moment she had been dreading and longing for in equal measure. The moment when she would have to trust someone with her truth and risk seeing the kindness in their eyes turn to judgment or disgust. "Not here," she said. "But if I come to the Vista Verde, I'll tell you everything. You deserve to know before you make an offer like this." Sebastian squeezed her hand. "Then let's go to the boarding house and pack your things. We can leave at first light, Mrs. Chen will be thrilled to have another woman around, I promise you." The journey to the Vista Verde took most of the day, with Adelaide's belongings loaded into Sebastian's wagon. She had been surprised by how little she had accumulated during her time in Columbus. Everything she owned fit into a single trunk and 2 bags. It felt like a metaphor for her entire life, constantly ready to flee, never putting down roots deep enough to matter. The ranch revealed itself gradually as they traveled north. The landscape opening up into rolling grassland dotted with cattle bearing Sebastian's brand. The house itself was larger than Adelaide had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of adobe and wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and several smaller structures she could not immediately identify. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a Chinese woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She welcomed Adelaide warmly, showing her to a comfortable room on the 2nd floor with windows overlooking the eastern pastures. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed instead of the narrow cot she had grown accustomed to at the boarding house. "You rest," Mrs. Chen said in slightly accented English. "Mr. Vance says you have had trouble in town. You are safe here. This is good house, good man." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes again. "Thank you," she managed. "I can't tell you how much this means to me." That evening, after a dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables that tasted better than anything Adelaide had eaten in months, Sebastian invited her to walk with him around the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible in their vividness. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching on the cold ground. Finally, Adelaide gathered her courage and began to speak. "I told you I worked as a clerk in St. Louis," she said quietly. "That was true. The store was owned by a man named Edward Franklin. He was kind to me, almost fatherly. He knew my mother had died and that I was alone in the world, I thought I was fortunate to have such understanding employment." Sebastian listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but attentive. "What I didn't know was that his son Peter had different ideas about me," Adelaide continued, her voice growing tighter with each word. "He started paying attention to me, bringing me small gifts, saying pretty things. I was flattered at first. He was handsome and well-educated from a good family. I thought maybe he genuinely cared for me." She paused, the memories painful even months later. "I was naive," she said bitterly. "He didn't care about me at all. He just wanted to see if he could seduce a poor girl with no family to protect her. When I refused his advances, he got angry. He started spreading rumors about me, telling people that I had been inappropriate with him, that I had tried to trap him into marriage. His father believed him, of course. He fired me and made sure no other respectable establishment in St. Louis would hire me." Adelaide forced herself to continue, to say the words that had been poisoning her from the inside. "The rumors got worse. Peter told people I had been with multiple men, that I was a woman of loose morals. None of it was true, Sebastian. I swear to you, none of it was true. But truth didn't matter. In a matter of weeks, I went from being a respectable clerk to being someone that decent people cross the street to avoid." She stopped walking and turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "So that's who I am," she said, her voice breaking. "A woman whose reputation was destroyed by a vengeful man. Damaged goods that no respectable person would want anything to do with. That's why I ended up working in a saloon in Columbus, because it was the only place that would hire me. And that's why you should reconsider having me here, because if anyone finds out about my past, it could damage your reputation too." The words hung between them in the gathering darkness. Adelaide waited for Sebastian to pull away, to make excuses about why she would need to leave after all. Instead, he reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Adelaide," he said softly, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze, expecting to see disappointment or doubt. Instead, she saw only warmth and an anger that she realized was directed not at her, but at those who had hurt her. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it," Sebastian said. "What happened to you in St. Louis was not your fault. You did nothing wrong. Some entitled fool decided to destroy your life because you had the self-respect to say no to him, and that says everything about his character and nothing about yours. But my reputation," Adelaide started. "Your reputation is based on lies told by a coward," Sebastian interrupted firmly. "I don't care what people in St. Louis said about you. I care about the woman I've gotten to know these past months. The woman who works hard and treats everyone with kindness. The woman who holds her head high even when the world tries to beat her down. That's the woman I see, Adelaide. That's the woman I'm honored to have here at the Vista Verde." Adelaide felt something crack open inside her, something that had been frozen and locked away since the day Edward Franklin had fired her. "How can you be so sure?" she whispered. "How can you have so much faith in someone you barely know?" "Because I've been watching you," Sebastian said simply. "The way you handle drunk men at the saloon without losing your composure. The way you're kind to Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house even when you're exhausted. The way you saved up your earnings instead of spending them because you had a plan to make something better of your life. That's not a woman of poor character, Adelaide. That's a woman of incredible strength." "I don't feel strong," Adelaide admitted. "I feel broken." Sebastian took both of her hands in his grip warm and solid. "Then let me tell you something my mother used to say. She said that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. What you've been through would have destroyed a weaker person. But here you are, still standing, still fighting. You're not broken, Adelaide. You're just battle-worn, and battles can be won." The compassion in his voice undid her completely. Adelaide found herself crying in earnest then, months of pain and fear and shame pouring out of her in great, gasping sobs. Sebastian pulled her into his arms and held her while she wept, one hand stroking her back soothingly, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of her emotions. When the tears finally subsided, Adelaide pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her loss of control. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "Don't apologize," Sebastian said gently. "I'd say those tears were a long time coming. Better to let them out than keep holding them in." They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, Adelaide felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. She had told someone her truth, and the world had not ended. Sebastian had not turned away from her in disgust or judgment. Instead, he had offered her something she had thought she would never have again: acceptance. Over the following weeks, Adelaide settled into life at the Vista Verde. She helped Mrs. Chen with the housework and cooking, finding genuine enjoyment in the simple rhythms of ranch life. She learned to make bread from scratch, to preserve vegetables for the winter, and to mend the endless supply of shirts and trousers that Sebastian and his ranch hands wore through with their hard work. The ranch hands themselves were a varied group. There was old Pete, a grizzled cowboy who had been working cattle since before Adelaide was born. The two younger hands, brothers named Tom and Jack Miller, were respectful and hardworking. They all treated Adelaide with courtesy, and she suspected Sebastian had made it very clear that she was under his protection. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Adelaide found herself thinking more and more about Sebastian in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude. She noticed the way he moved with unconscious grace, the strength in his hands when he worked with the horses, the laugh lines that appeared around his eyes when something genuinely amused him. She found herself looking for excuses to be near him, to hear his voice, to catch his rare but brilliant smiles. It terrified her, this growing feeling in her heart. She had sworn she would never let herself be vulnerable to a man again, but Sebastian was different from any man she had ever known. He never made demands of her time or attention. He treated her as an equal, asking her opinion on ranch matters and actually listening to her answers. He was gentle without being weak, strong without being domineering. One evening in late March, Adelaide was working in the kitchen garden, planting seeds for the spring vegetables when Sebastian came to find her. He had been out riding the property line all day, and he looked tired but content. "Got a minute?" he asked, leaning against the garden fence. Adelaide wiped the dirt from her hands and stood, stretching her back. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Sebastian seemed to choose his words carefully. "I've been thinking," he said. "You've been here for 2 months now, and you've more than earned your keep. Mrs. Chen tells me the house has never run more smoothly. The men all speak highly of you, and I—" He paused, and Adelaide saw something vulnerable flicker across his face. "I find myself looking forward to the end of each day because I know I'll see you at dinner. I find myself making excuses to come back to the house during the day just to catch a glimpse of you. And I realize that sounds like the ramblings of a fool, but I promised myself I'd be honest with you, Adelaide. Always honest." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying, Sebastian?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you," Sebastian said, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I'm saying that when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it. I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like the chance to court you properly. And if you don't, I'll respect that, and you'll always have a home here for as long as you want one." Adelaide felt her own vulnerability rising to meet his, the fear and the hope tangling together in her chest. "I do feel something," she admitted quietly. "Something that scares me more than I can say. Because the last time I trusted a man, it destroyed my life." "I'm not Peter Franklin," Sebastian said firmly. "And I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove myself worthy of your trust. However long that takes, Adelaide. I'm a patient man." Adelaide looked at him standing there in the fading light, this good man who had given her shelter and kindness without asking for anything in return. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she heard his voice, the way she felt safe for the first time in months when he was near. She thought about all the reasons she should protect herself, but they seemed flimsy in the face of what she felt for him. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid of getting hurt again. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough for you. I'm afraid that my past will come back to haunt us both." Sebastian closed the distance between them, cupping her face gently in his hands. "Then let me be brave enough for both of us," he said. "Let me show you that love doesn't have to hurt, that not all men are liars. That you are more than good enough for me, you're everything I never knew I was looking for." Adelaide felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but these were different from the ones she had cried before. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something beautiful in her life. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "Okay, Sebastian, I'd like to try." The smile that spread across Sebastian's face was radiant. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet, and somehow more intimate than anything Adelaide had ever experienced. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin. "I promise you won't regret this." Their courtship unfolded with a gentleness that Adelaide had not known was possible. Sebastian took her riding across the ranch property, showing her the hidden corners of his land, the creek that ran clear and cold through the north pasture, the hill where wildflowers bloomed in riot of colors, the ancient cottonwood tree that provided shade on hot summer days. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Sebastian told her his dreams for the ranch, his hope to build a legacy that would last beyond his lifetime. Adelaide, emboldened by his openness, began to share her own dreams, small things at first, like learning to ride well enough to help move cattle or planting a flower garden by the house. But gradually, larger dreams emerged. Dreams of belonging somewhere, of building a life that meant something, of maybe, someday, having a family of her own. Mrs. Chen watched their growing romance with obvious approval, often shooing them out of the house together, with not-so-subtle suggestions that they should go enjoy the evening air. Old Pete and the Miller brothers were equally supportive, treating Adelaide with a protective affection that made her feel like part of a family. It was late May, when Sebastian asked Adelaide to ride with him to a spot he called the Vista Point, the highest hill on his property. They rode out in the late afternoon, the horses picking their way carefully up the rocky incline. When they reached the summit, Adelaide understood how the ranch had gotten its name. The view was breathtaking. In every direction, the land rolled away in shades of green and gold, dotted with cattle and wild game. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon without interruption. In the far distance, she could see the faint outline of mountains. "This is where I come when I need to think," Sebastian said, dismounting and helping Adelaide down from her horse. "When my father died, I spent a lot of time up here trying to figure out if I was strong enough to keep the ranch going. When I'm troubled or confused, this place helps me find clarity." Adelaide walked to the edge of the hilltop, letting the breeze catch her hair. "I can see why," she said. It's beautiful up here, like you can see the whole world. Sebastian came to stand beside her. I brought you here because I wanted you to see this, he said. Because when I stand here, I'm reminded of what's possible, of how much potential there is in life if we're brave enough to reach for it. He turned to face her fully, and Adelaide saw determination mixed with nervousness in his expression. Her heart began to race again, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Adelaide, I know we've only been courting for a couple of months, Sebastian said. And I know you've been hurt before, that you have reasons to be cautious. But I also know that life is uncertain and short, and when you find something real, you don't let it slip away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small but beautiful sapphire set in the center. This was my mother's ring, Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. She told me before she died to save it for someone special, someone worthy of the love she taught me to give. Adelaide Foster, you are that person. You're strong and kind and resilient in ways that humble me. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be a better man. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day. He dropped to one knee on the rocky ground, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. Will you marry me, Adelaide? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I build this life with? Adelaide felt like she could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the overwhelming rush of emotion that swept through her. This man, this wonderful, patient, kind man, wanted to marry her. Wanted to give her his name and his future and his mother's ring. Wanted her, despite everything she had been through, despite the damaged reputation she carried, despite all the reasons she had given him to walk away. But beneath the shock and wonder, fear still lurked. Sebastian, she said, her voice shaking. I need you to understand something. If you marry me, people will talk. When they find out about my past, about the rumors in St. Louis, it could affect your business, your standing in the community. I couldn't bear it if I ruined things for you the way I was ruined. Sebastian stood, still holding the ring box, and took her hands in his free one. Let them talk, he said fiercely. Let the whole territory talk if they want. I know the truth about you, Adelaide. I know that you're a woman of integrity who was wronged by a coward. Anyone who judges you for that isn't someone whose opinion I value. And anyone who won't do business with me because of my wife isn't someone I want to do business with anyway. But what if? Adelaide started. No, Sebastian interrupted gently. No more what ifs. I'm not promising you a life without challenges or difficulties, but I am promising you that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You won't have to carry your burdens alone anymore, Adelaide. You'll have me and Mrs. Chen and the whole crew of the Vista Verde standing with you. You'll have a family again. Adelaide looked at this man who had somehow seen past all her defenses to the frightened, wounded woman underneath, and who had chosen to love her anyway. She thought about everything she had lost in St. Louis, her reputation, her job, her sense of self-worth. But she also thought about everything she had found here at the Vista Verde: safety, purpose, friendship, and love. She realized that she had been given a choice. She could let the fear win, could spend the rest of her life protecting herself from potential hurt by refusing to let anyone close. Or she could be brave enough to accept this gift Sebastian was offering her, to believe that she deserved happiness and love. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes, Sebastian, I'll marry you. The joy that lit Sebastian's face was worth every moment of fear it had taken to get there. He slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been meant for her all along, and then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "You've just made me the happiest man in New Mexico territory," he said. "And you've given me something I never thought I'd have again," Adelaide replied. "Hope for the future. A reason to believe that good things can still happen." They were married 4 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Chen spent days preparing food for the celebration, her happiness at the union evident in the care she took with every dish. Old Pete stood up as Sebastian's best man, his weathered face split in a rare grin. The Miller brothers decorated the barn for dancing, stringing up lanterns that would glow once the sun set. Adelaide had worried that no one would come, that the whispers about her past might have reached Columbus and beyond. But Sebastian had invited their neighbors and business associates, with a straightforward letter explaining that he was marrying a woman of exceptional character who had been badly treated in her previous life, and that anyone who had a problem with that was not welcome at the Vista Verde. To Adelaide's amazement and relief, nearly everyone invited came to celebrate with them. The few who declined did so quietly, and Sebastian dismissed them without a second thought. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house came, as did Henry Walsh from the Silver Dollar. Several ranching families from the surrounding area arrived with wedding gifts and warm congratulations. The ceremony itself was performed by a circuit preacher who traveled through Columbus once a month. Adelaide wore a dress of pale blue cotton that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the ranch woven into her hair. Sebastian wore his best suit, looking handsome enough to make her heart skip. When the preacher asked if Sebastian would take Adelaide as his wife, to love and honor all the days of his life, Sebastian's answer rang out clear and certain: "I will." And when the preacher turned to Adelaide, asking the same question, she felt all the fear and shame she had carried for so long simply fall away. She looked into Sebastian's gray eyes and saw her future reflected there, bright and full of possibility. "I will," she said, her voice strong. The celebration that followed was full of music and laughter and dancing. Adelaide found herself swept from partner to partner as the ranchers and their wives took turns spinning her around the barn floor. But her favorite dances were with Sebastian, held close in his arms while the fiddle played something slow and sweet. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Sebastian stole Adelaide away from the party. They walked hand in hand toward the house, toward the room they would now share, toward the life they would build together. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" Sebastian asked, squeezing her hand. Adelaide thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The pain of St. Louis seemed distant now, a dark chapter in a story that had taken an unexpected turn toward light. She had been broken and afraid, convinced that she was damaged beyond repair. But Sebastian had looked at her and seen something different. He had seen value and strength and beauty where she had only seen ruin. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," she replied honestly. "You gave me my life back, Sebastian. You gave me myself back." "You did that on your own," Sebastian corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being there to see it happen. And I plan to spend every day of our marriage making sure you never forget how remarkable you are." Their marriage was everything Adelaide had never dared to dream of. Sebastian was patient and tender, teaching her that physical intimacy could be an expression of love rather than something to be endured or feared. He made her laugh with his dry humor and challenged her to see herself the way he saw her, as someone strong and capable and worthy of respect. Adelaide threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle when extra hands were needed. She expanded the kitchen garden into something impressive, providing fresh vegetables for the household and enough extra to sell in Columbus. She befriended the neighboring ranchers' wives, finding companionship in women like Mary Torres from the adjoining property and Sarah Henderson, whose family ran cattle to the west. There were challenges, of course. That first year, they lost several head of cattle to rustlers. A particularly harsh winter storm damaged part of the barn roof, and there were occasional whispers from people who had heard the rumors about Adelaide's past. But Sebastian stood firm beside her through all of it, his faith in her never wavering. It was Sarah Henderson who finally confronted the rumor situation head-on. She arrived at the Vista Verde one afternoon with a determined expression and a basket of fresh eggs. "I heard something in town yesterday," Sarah said without preamble, setting the eggs on the kitchen table. "Some gossip about you, Adelaide, from some woman passing through on her way to California. She claimed to be from St. Louis and said some unpleasant things." Adelaide felt her stomach drop. This was what she had been dreading, the moment when her past would catch up with her and destroy the life she had built. "What did she say?" Adelaide asked, forcing herself to meet Sarah's eyes. "Does it matter?" Sarah replied firmly. "Because I'll tell you what I said in response. I said that Adelaide Vance was one of the finest women I'd ever met, that she worked harder than any 3 men, and that anyone spreading lies about her would have to answer to me and every other woman in this territory who values honor over gossip." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes. "Sarah, you don't know what happened in St. Louis. You don't know I know enough," Sarah interrupted. "I know that you're kind and honest. I know that Sebastian Vance is one of the best judges of character I've ever met and he chose you. That tells me everything I need to know. The rest is just noise, Adelaide. Don't give it power by fearing it." The conversation marked a turning point. Adelaide realized that she had been living with the expectation that her past would rise up to destroy her at any moment. But what actually happened was that the people who knew her, who had seen her character and integrity firsthand, refused to give credence to old rumors and lies. The community she had feared would reject her instead rallied around her. 2 years into their marriage, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had dreamed of having children, but the idea of bringing a new life into the world felt like an enormous responsibility. Sebastian's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight, before carefully setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. His concern and excitement in the months that followed were endearing, even when he became overly protective. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide reminded him gently when he insisted on doing all the heavy lifting around the house. "I know," Sebastian said sheepishly. "I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe." "Humor me," Adelaide did, accepting his protectiveness as an expression of love. Mrs. Chen was equally thrilled about the coming baby, already planning what she would teach the child and how she would spoil it shamelessly. In November of 1888, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy after a long but uncomplicated labor. They named him Samuel, and he had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Sebastian wept openly when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered to Adelaide as she lay exhausted but happy in their bed. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being brave enough to build this life with me." Adelaide reached up to touch his face, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Thank you for showing me that I was worth loving," she replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys. Sebastian proved to be a devoted father, taking Samuel everywhere with him as soon as the boy was old enough to sit on a horse. Adelaide watched them together and fell in love with her husband all over again, seeing the gentleness with which he taught their son about the land and the animals and the values that mattered. 3 years after Samuel's birth, Adelaide had a daughter they named Catherine. 2 years after that came another son, Michael. The Vista Verde rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Adelaide marveled at how far she had come from the frightened, ashamed woman who had fled St. Louis. As the children grew, Adelaide made sure they knew the importance of character and integrity. She taught them that mistakes and hardships did not define a person, that what mattered was how you responded to adversity. She wanted them to grow up with the compassion and strength that their father possessed, the qualities that had saved her when she needed saving most. One evening when Samuel was 10 years old, he came to Adelaide with a troubled expression. "Mother," he said hesitantly, "Billy Johnson at school said something about you. He said his father heard that you used to work in a saloon and that meant you were a bad woman. I told him he was lying, but he insisted it was true." Adelaide's first instinct was panic, the old fear that her past would taint her children. But then she looked at her son's face, saw the confusion and the need for truth, and made a decision. "It is true that I worked in a saloon in Columbus," she said calmly, "before I married your father. But working in a saloon doesn't make someone a bad person, Samuel. I worked there because I needed to earn money to survive, and it was the only job I could find at the time." "But why was it the only job?" Samuel asked, clearly trying to understand. Adelaide took a deep breath. This was the conversation she had known would come eventually. "Because before I came to New Mexico, something unfair happened to me. A man told lies about me and people believed him. Those lies made it hard for me to find work, so I came here to start over, and that's when I met your father." "What kind of lies?" Samuel persisted. "The kind that hurt innocent people," Adelaide said. "The kind that remind us why we should always seek the truth before we judge someone. Your father saw the truth of who I was, Samuel, even when others couldn't or wouldn't. That's the kind of man I hope you'll grow up to be. The kind who looks past rumors and gossip to see the real person underneath." Samuel was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he said, "I think Father is the smartest man in the world because he saw how wonderful you are." Adelaide pulled her son into a hug, her eyes wet with tears. "You tell Billy Johnson that your mother worked hard every day of her life, and there's no shame in honest work. And if his father has a problem with that, he can come talk to me directly." The confrontation with Billy's father never materialized. Instead, Samuel repeated Adelaide's words at school, and the matter was quietly dropped. But the incident reminded Adelaide that her past, while no longer defining her, would always be a part of her story. She had learned to own that story, to see it not as a source of shame but as evidence of her resilience. As the years passed, the Vista Verde prospered. Sebastian's hard work and integrity earned him respect throughout the territory. The ranch expanded, and they hired more hands to help manage the growing operation. Adelaide's garden became famous in the region, and she started a small business selling preserves and pickles that earned her own money and a sense of accomplishment. Their children grew strong and capable. Samuel showed a natural talent for ranching and a kindness toward animals that reminded Adelaide so much of Sebastian, it made her heart ache. Catherine was clever and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Michael had a mischievous streak, but also a fierce loyalty to his family that endeared him to everyone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sebastian took Adelaide back to Vista Point, the place where he had proposed. They rode up the hill together, leaving the children in Mrs. Chen's capable hands, and sat on the edge overlooking their land. "You remember what I said when I proposed to you," Sebastian asked, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "You said a lot of things," Adelaide replied with a smile, "most of them very sweet and romantic." "I said I wanted to spend the rest of my life proving that I loved you," Sebastian said. "And I meant it. Every day with you has been a gift, Adelaide. Every morning I wake up grateful that you were brave enough to say yes." Adelaide leaned into his embrace, looking out at the land they had built their life on. "I was so afraid back then," she admitted. "Afraid that I didn't deserve happiness, afraid that my past would always define me, but you showed me that I could be more than what had happened to me. You gave me a future when I thought I had none." "You gave yourself a future," Sebastian corrected gently. "I just had the honor of being part of it. You're the strongest person I know, Adelaide. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came through it with your kindness and integrity intact. That's not because of me. That's because of who you are at your core." Adelaide turned to kiss him, this man who had seen her value when she could not see it herself. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. You and the children are my whole world." "And you are ours," Sebastian replied, "always and forever." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Adelaide reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the frightened woman she had been that night in Columbus when Marcus Delaney had threatened her. She thought about how she had whispered to Sebastian that she was damaged goods, not worth his time or attention, and she remembered what he had said in response, words that had changed the trajectory of her entire life. "You're worth everything." He had been right. Not because she was perfect or without flaws, but because every person had inherent worth that could not be destroyed by lies or circumstances or other people's cruelty. Sebastian had seen that worth in her when she could not see it in herself, and his faith had helped her rebuild from the inside out. As they rode back down to the ranch house, where their children were undoubtedly driving Mrs. Chen to distraction with their pre-bedtime energy, Adelaide felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had not turned out the way she had planned when she was a young girl in St. Louis. It had been harder, more painful, more complicated. But it had also been more beautiful, more fulfilling, more real than anything she had imagined. She had found love and family and purpose. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she felt, and worthy of every good thing that came her way. The Vista Verde had become more than just a ranch. It was home. It was the place where Adelaide had been reborn, where she had learned that endings could also be beginnings, that damaged things could be made whole, and that love, when it was real and true, could heal even the deepest wounds. Years later, when Adelaide was in her 60s and her children had families of their own, she would tell her grandchildren the story of how she met their grandfather. She would tell them about working in a saloon and being afraid, about a kind cowboy who stood up for a stranger, about learning to trust again after betrayal. And she would tell them the most important lesson of all, that your past does not define your future, that every person deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept love when it is offered. But on this anniversary night, with the stars emerging overhead and Sebastian's hand warm in hers, Adelaide was simply grateful. Grateful for the journey that had brought her here, grateful for the man who had loved her through her fear and pain, and grateful for the beautiful, complicated, wonderful life they had built together. She was no longer damaged goods. She was Adelaide Vance, wife and mother and rancher, a woman who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. She was loved and valued and whole. She was, just as Sebastian had always insisted, worth everything.